Welcome to From Manuscript to Ministry, created and produced by Elder William Moore, the podcast where faith meets the written word. Each week, your hosts David and Martha dive into powerful, self-published books by Christian authors who are boldly using their God-given voices to impact the kingdom. Whether you're an aspiring writer, a reader seeking spiritual growth, or a ministry leader in search of authentic resources, this is your space to be inspired, encouraged, and equipped. Let's explore today's featured book and uncover the life-changing message behind the manuscript.
Okay, let's unpack this. So if you're joining us today, we kind of know you're someone who really prizes knowledge. And not just random facts, right? But like comprehensive, synthesized insight that kind of helps you move faster, think a bit deeper. You're the learner persona we talk about. But what if the best way to be genuinely well-informed, to get that real aha moment isn't just about cramming in more information? What if it's about fundamentally rethinking why you're seeking it in the first place? Our deep dive today is really tackling this idea head on, this integrated approach to getting knowledge. We're diving into insights from this devotional guide, Proverbs 31, Empowering Quotes for Everyday Motivation, by William Moore. And we're really zooming in on just one, but a really powerful maxim, quote number 11. She is a lifelong learner. Now, this bit of wisdom was actually the focus of episode 18 of the From Manuscript to Ministry show. You might know it was about unpacking the really profound wisdom behind a woman's spiritual curiosity.
And the kind of disciplined, really comprehensive growth mindset you need to live a life that actually has meaningful impact. So our mission is to take all those theological insights, those motivational points they made, and turn them into something actionable, like knowledge you can use right away.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here, right from the start, is how the source material just raises the stakes. It's not talking about just, tweaking things here and there, little improvements. It actually positions lifelong learning as this necessary integrated pathway, a path to, spiritual, personal, and even community influence. So for you listening, the key thing, that nugget of insight, is realizing that seeking knowledge, you can't just box it up. Like if you only focus on the intellectual side, you really risk becoming kind of isolated, maybe a bit brittle in your thinking.
Right.
But if you only focus on the spiritual, you might struggle to connect your faith to, the messy complexities of the real world. So this integrated approach, that's really the core of the wisdom here. And we're going to be extracting these little nuggets across 4 really essential interconnected dimensions of growth. You've got emotional, spiritual, intellectual, and relational. Thinking about it like maybe a 4-quadrant map, that's critical to really grasping the depth of this Proverbs 31 guidance.
Okay, let's start with that map then, because we're moving beyond just the vague idea of, be a better person. We're focusing on these specific, you could almost say measurable, pillars of growth. And like you said, in the source material, they list them out: emotional, spiritual, intellectual, and relational. Now, anyone can list things right, but let's look closely at how the sources show they actually interact with each other. Why is including all 4 so essential? For me, I think the most potent insight here is maybe how the emotional dimension actually feeds the intellectual discipline. Think about it. If learning is discipline, if it's hard work, well, that discipline, it's an emotional task first, isn't it?
That's a really powerful point. Yeah. If we kind of dissect those 4, they're not exactly equal partners, are they? They exist in this dynamic, mutually supportive hierarchy. So emotionally, the learner, she has to cultivate resilience, right? Manage frustration when things get tough, and possess that self-awareness to even spot where the gaps in her understanding are. Because, without that emotional regulation, intellectual pursuits can get really erratic, maybe driven by ego or comparing yourself to others.
Mm-hmm.
So emotional growth, it allows for the patience you absolutely need to tackle complex subjects, especially when the answers don't just, pop out quickly. Then you've got the spiritual dimension, and that provides the motive, the why. This gives the learning its actual purpose. It makes sure that the knowledge you get serves wisdom and service, not just, personal vanity or showing off. And the spiritual motive, it directly drives the 3rd pillar.
The intellectual one.
Exactly, the intellectual component. That's the acquiring facts, synthesizing data, understanding how the world works.
I often hear people say they need to learn more if it's something difficult, like, astrophysics or maybe complex economics. But then they struggle with consistency. They treat it like it's just an external challenge. But what you're suggesting, and what the source material seems to suggest, is that the failure to keep up that intellectual pursuit, it's often really an internal emotional failure, like a failure of self-regulation or maybe resilience.
Precisely, yeah. If we connect that intellectual rigor back to the need for being well-informed, which, our listener really values, we see that emotional strength is basically the engine. It powers the whole thing. You just can't handle conflicting data or really complex arguments or even just the sheer frustration of being wrong sometimes unless your emotional foundation is pretty sound.
Yeah.
So the intellectual growth gives you the what you know, but that emotional growth, it really determines the rate you learn at and the sustainability of that knowing, how long you can stick with it.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
And then finally, that fourth dimension, relational growth. That's kind of the application layer, if you will. It takes all that internal growth, the regulated emotion, the spiritual motive, the knowledge you've picked up, and it directs it outward.
Yeah.
Towards other people. It's that constant learning about, human interaction, different communication styles, how to resolve conflict, empathy, all that stuff.
Yeah, that relational aspect, that really is where the rubber meets the road, isn't it? The sources talk about needing this growth specifically to serve and mentor across generations. I mean, if you're brilliant, just technically brilliant, but you lack that relational maturity, you can't actually convey your brilliance effectively, especially not to someone maybe from a different background or a different generation. Let's think about a practical example here. Relational learning could mean studying how to apologize well, like really effectively. Or it could mean learning how to truly listen without just, waiting for your turn to talk or formulating your rebuttal. These are actual skills that require some intellectual understanding, right? Knowing the principles of good communication.
Wow.
But they're executed entirely through emotional maturity and applied relationally. So the wisdom of Proverbs 31, when you look at it this way, it's not just about managing finances well. It's about successfully operating within a complex, interconnected community.
Exactly. And that successful operation, it requires constant adaptation. Her emotional growth, it lets her handle the demands of maybe leading something without unnecessary stress. Her intellectual growth gives her the strategic solutions, and then her relational growth makes sure those solutions are delivered with grace and maximum impact.
Right.
Fostering loyalty, collaboration within her sphere of influence. So this whole holistic model, it makes learning genuinely productive, not just self-serving.
Right. So you've kind of established the why behind holistic growth and necessity of it. But how does the source material elevate this beyond just, standard self-help advice? Let's talk about this idea that the pursuit of knowledge is actually framed as a true spiritual calling. That word calling, that really changes the accountability structure entirely, doesn't it?
No, absolutely. Framing learning as a spiritual calling, it implies that this commitment to growth, it's actually part of your purpose, like a necessary act of obedience, maybe.
Yeah.
Stewardship of the mind God gave you. It totally shifts the motivation away from just getting a temporary certification or some personal pat on the back towards seeing it as a permanent act of worship almost. It means seeking knowledge, not just to, survive or get ahead in the world, but to better serve the divine purpose for your life, whatever that might be.
Okay.
And this concept is anchored really deeply in Scripture. The devotional guide we're drawing from, it highlights a couple of verses that really clarify the depth of this calling.
Okay, let's start with the one on discernment. That's Proverbs 18, verse 15. It says, "The heart of the discerning acquires knowledge, for the ears of the wise seek it out." That sounds like an internal engine driving the whole pursuit.
It really is the ultimate internal engine.
Yeah.
I mean, look closely at the language there. Even just in translation, you see this active posture. The word for discerning in this context, it speaks to someone who's judicious.
Yeah.
Someone who has trained their mind to see distinctions, to make accurate judgments. So discernment, in this light, it isn't just recognizing, plain right from wrong. It's that higher function of differentiating between good, better, and maybe the best application of your knowledge, especially when you're under pressure.
Okay. So the process is kind of like spiritual health. That's the discerning heart bit that leads to active knowledge seeking acquires knowledge, which then results in applied wisdom, the wise seeking it out.
Precisely. Yeah, you got it. The sources really emphasize that knowledge acquisition isn't passive. It's a proactive, intentional hunt. It's fueled by a heart that's already kind of calibrated towards truth. So if your spiritual core is healthy, the idea is you're naturally hungry for information that supports and expands that truth. It's almost the inverse of that modern tendency where, sometimes people only seek knowledge to confirm what they already believe.
Yeah.
Their biases.
Right.
The discerning heart, though, it seeks knowledge even if, maybe especially if, it challenges prior assumptions.
Okay, but I have to push back just a little bit here on the practicality.
Yeah.
In the real world, doesn't that intellectual drive often come before the right heart? I mean, lots of people start learning purely out of, say, competitive professional need or just simple curiosity, and then maybe later they find some kind of spiritual alignment or purpose for it. How does the devotional guide handle that tension? The tension between like pure, maybe self-interested curiosity and seeking knowledge for spiritual ends.
That's a really critical question. And yeah, that tension is real. The way the guide seems to resolve it is through this concept of stewardship and intentionality. It argues that all gifts, and that includes intellect, curiosity, are divinely bestowed. They come from somewhere. So even if the initial spark is just pure curiosity, the act itself, the disciplined learning, the resulting expansion of the mind, that's seen as intrinsically pleasing to the creator. Where the calling comes in is that it transforms the end goal. See, the secular learner might just stop when they get the job promotion or finish the project, but the spiritual learner ideally continues because the expansion of understanding itself becomes part of the reward. And that discerning heart we talked about, it allows them to then intentionally dedicate that expanded knowledge back to a higher purpose.
Okay, so that reframes pure curiosity. It makes it a potential spiritual asset as long as you direct the outcome responsibly. That makes sense. And that leads us straight into the second foundational scripture you mentioned, which is 2 Timothy 2.15. This one seems to explicitly link the effort and the accountability. Study to show thyself approved unto God.
Yes, this verse really shifts the focus. It moves from the internal motive we saw in Proverbs towards the external visible effort. If we look at the Greek word that's often translated as study here, it's spoudazo. And spoudazo means more than just hitting the books. It means to be diligent, to make every effort, or even to hasten, to be eager about it. It doesn't just imply like rote memorization. It demands consistent, energetic, disciplined labor.
Wow.
So this means the lifelong learner, she has to commit to sustained, sometimes, let's be honest, tedious application, reading the dense text, really analyzing the difficult concepts, staying focused when you're easily distracted. And the goal of all this immense effort, it's right there to be approved unto God.
That really shifts the whole paradigm, doesn't it? It means every hour spent researching some topic, every moment you spend wrestling with a complex idea, it's actually part of your spiritual resume, so to speak. It elevates the daily grind, the diligence, far above just mere self-improvement.
It absolutely does.
Okay, so let's try and synthesize the core link that seems to hold these two scriptures together. It feels like it's about humility, growth, and divine wisdom. If Proverbs 18.15 requires that discerning heart and 2 Timothy 2.15 requires that dedicated diligence, then the absolute prerequisite for both of them, you have to be humility, right? You have to be humble enough to admit you don't know something in order to acquire knowledge in the first place, and then humble enough to dedicate the relentless discipline required for that spiritual approval.
Humility is, without a doubt, the cornerstone of genuine lifelong learning. Think about it. The moment you believe you've totally mastered a topic, or maybe that some new idea is just beneath your consideration, your ears close up, metaphorically speaking. And that discerning heart, it stops acquiring. The true lifelong learner has to embrace the reality that they will always be a beginner in some new area. There's always more.
Always something new.
Always. And this connects really deeply to discipline, too. Why is that sustained, disciplined effort that's spoudazo? Why is that a humble act?
Well, because true discipline often involves the unglamorous stuff, right?
Yeah.
The difficult, maybe repetitive work that doesn't generate immediate praise or validation from others. So the willingness to just put in that effort, knowing that the ultimate validation isn't worldly, it's spiritual. That is the very definition of humility in action. It's prioritizing that long-term, often unseen spiritual goal over the maybe more immediate gratifying intellectual win. That makes perfect sense. Yeah. The humility needed to say, I don't know, it's kind of the same humility needed to stay at the desk when you'd honestly rather be doing something easier.
Okay, so if we connect this to the bigger picture then, once this spiritual calling is embraced, once that humility is there, what are the actual, tangible, real-world benefits? What comes from this commitment to growth? Because, knowledge is most valuable when it's understood and actually applied. So what does this application look like for someone operating in maybe high-pressure environments?
Good question.
Well, the benefits, they manifest pretty powerfully across those same 4 dimensions we discussed earlier. And they translate into significant, often visible outcomes in life and in service to others. The first major benefit has to be deepened faith. That continuous intellectual and spiritual curiosity, it strengthens and grounds your faith. It makes it sturdy, not brittle or easily broken. As you study things like history or theology or philosophy, but through a critical lens, your faith can move from maybe just an inherited belief to a real intellectual conviction, one that's supported by spiritual experience, too. And this comprehensive knowledge, it allows the learner to navigate maybe skeptical arguments or difficult theological questions without just panicking. It creates a kind of spiritual resilience that's absolutely essential for enduring life's inevitable crises.
It almost immunizes you against that constant flood of conflicting information we all face, because your own foundation is actually well-researched and thought through.
Exactly, that's a good way to put it. Then the second benefit is strengthen relationships. And this is so crucial for the modern learner who, let's face it, can often feel quite isolated by their pursuit of knowledge. But growth in those emotional, intellectual spheres, it directly feeds into healthier relational dynamics. Your intellectual clarity, when it's paired with genuine emotional maturity, allows you to become a better listener, a more empathetic counselor maybe, just a safer, wiser person for others to interact with. Think about that financial wisdom that's often attributed to the Proverbs 31 woman. That wisdom isn't just about like balance sheets and spreadsheets. It's deeply about relational application. It's knowing how to manage wealth in a way that provides for the household, yes, but also supports the community. And that often requires really complex relational negotiations, maybe even conflict management skills. So your learning doesn't isolate you. Ideally, it makes you a valuable resource for others.
And that leads us right to maybe the most powerful outcome that the sources highlight. Empowerment for leadership and service. This commitment to holistic learning, it provides the precise toolkit needed for real-world impact. Specifically, the sources mention empowerment to lead, empowerment to mentor, and this is interesting, empowerment to serve across generations.
Yes.
Let's dive deep into that idea of serving across generations, because that really feels like where the return on investment of lifelong learning becomes super apparent.
Yeah.
Like you said, continuous learning provides the tools you need to bridge those generational gaps, right? And offer mentorship that's actually relevant.
Yeah.
If your knowledge is static, stuck in the past, you just become irrelevant to the generation coming up behind you.
That inability to serve across generations, it's almost the natural consequence of stagnant learning, isn't it? The lifelong learner, though, the one who keeps growing, they remain dynamically relevant. Think about mentoring someone starting a business today. It's just not enough to tell them what worked back in, say, 1995 when everyone used paper ledgers.
Right. Totally different world.
Totally different. You have to understand, or at least be willing to learn about, the nuances of things like AI implementation or decentralized marketplaces, or just the shifting social dynamics of remote work culture. The learner who has prioritized both emotional and intellectual growth, they get that their mentorship has to speak the language of the mentee's current reality. It means being able to translate timeless wisdom, principles like integrity, discipline, hard work, translate those into timely application. Application that uses modern tools and addresses modern anxieties.
That ability to translate wisdom across time and context, that's like a direct measure of their ongoing growth, isn't it?
Right.
That's like a really specific example. Maybe a seasoned professional is mentoring a young, new employee who just got a really scathing peer review.
Ouch.
Tough situation. Right, so the professional, the mentor, she has to engage in deep emotional learning first, just to regulate her own reaction to the critique. Maybe it feels unfair. Then intellectual learning to understand the organizational politics, the context of the criticism. And then, crucially, relational learning to figure out how to deliver feedback that actually builds the mentee's confidence rather than just destroying it. All four dimensions, emotional, intellectual, relational, probably spiritual too, they're all engaged simultaneously to produce effective multi-generational service in that moment.
That's a perfect illustration, yeah. It makes them dynamic reservoirs of applied wisdom, like you said, not just stagnant relics simply recalling past glory days.
Yeah.
And the sources, they provide this really crucial encouragement, too, that this journey of growth, it really is lifelong. And the ultimate accountability for sustained learning means you're never really left to just fend for yourself. The idea is that God walks with the learner every step, providing purpose and that sustained encouragement needed to keep evolving.
Okay, now, let's talk practically about the reality of being a highly motivated learner type. You want knowledge, you want it quickly, you want it thoroughly, we get that. But the sheer volume of information just flying at us today is staggering. And this often leads to feelings of, information overload, burnout, maybe that crippling pressure of comparison. Everyone else seems to know more.
Yes. And this is exactly why that source highlight, the one about the synchronal nature of learning, is so incredibly crucial. Crucial for mental and spiritual health. The original material emphasizes that learning looks different in every season of life. And that insight, honestly, it's a vital tool for managing those feelings of inadequacy, that pressure of comparison you mentioned. We have to really analyze the implication there. Growth isn't just this steady, linear climb upwards. It's much more cyclical. It's adaptive. There might be seasons of really intense acquisition, like an intellectual sprint, where you're heavily focused on getting certifications, taking courses, mastering complex professional material because you have to. But those seasons, they have to be offset or maybe balanced by seasons focused more on internal growth and application. Maybe that's more like a relational or an emotional marathon. Slower pace, different focus.
Yeah, I think we often define learning success purely by external metrics, don't we? Like degrees acquired, papers published, how many books you read last month. But the sources seem to suggest that during a season of crisis, let's say you're managing a sudden family illness or navigating a massive career shift, success might be defined simply by maintaining integrity and sanity, which is actually a huge emotional and spiritual learning curve in itself.
Yeah.
We might have planned to read, I don't know, some classic work of philosophy.
Yeah.
But then the crisis hits, and suddenly our learning shifts immediately to, how do I communicate with this doctor effectively? Or how do I maintain relational boundaries when my energy is totally depleted?
Exactly. Recognizing that your current season dictates your current learning priority, that's vital for mental health. If you're in a season that demands deep emotional healing, trying to force some heavy intellectual deep dive on top of that, it's only going to lead to exhaustion and, likely, failure, which then just spirals into guilt and feeling inadequate.
Yeah, been there.
Right. The true lifelong learner, the one embracing this model, learns to identify the curriculum that their life actually requires right now. And we have to remember the Proverbs 31 context again. That woman, she managed her household, her land, her employees, her reputation in the community. Her learning had to be constantly adapting to market fluctuations, family needs, community crises. Her learning was responsive. It wasn't rigidly scheduled according to some external syllabus.
That brings us right to the specific encouragement that was provided in the source material, aimed particularly at women, but really for anyone, feeling behind in their journey. This speaks so directly to that pressure of comparison, which just gets amplified like crazy by our digitally connected world, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely.
We scroll through social media or we listen to successful leaders talk and we think, oh man, I should have read that book already, or I should have mastered that skill, or why haven't I achieved that milestone by now? But the devotional seems to suggest that the very definition of success actually shifts based on the season you're in, that the growth is kind of custom tailored to your individual current purpose and your current pace. It's not some final judgment on your ultimate potential.
That custom tailoring, that's the reassurance, isn't it? And it links right back to the idea of the spiritual calling. If this journey is guided, then the curriculum is precisely designed for your current needs, regardless of what external comparisons might suggest. Your value isn't determined by, your output volume this particular month. It's determined by your continuous willingness to just show up and learn whatever the day or the season demands.
Okay.
But this does raise an important question. We spoke earlier about humility being the absolute prerequisite for knowledge acquisition. How does that same humility factor into accepting that learning will look different and maybe feel slower in certain seasons?
That's interesting. Well, I suppose if I lack humility, I fight this season, right? I try to force that high-output intellectual study when really my resources are completely depleted by emotional demands. I refuse to accept that my capacity is maybe just temporarily limited.
Absolutely. That lack of humility, it creates resistance, it creates resentment, maybe even towards the circumstances demanding your energy. But the acceptance of a slower, perhaps more inwardly focused pace, which might be absolutely necessary for emotional survival, or for deep spiritual reflection, that acceptance itself can be seen as an act of submission to divine wisdom, maybe. It's about trusting that the current curriculum, whether that curriculum is learning patience with a particularly difficult child or learning resilience during a financial downturn, is exactly what you need right now to deepen your character, even if it doesn't result in a new degree or a fancy certification you can post online. True learning, the kind described here, it's ultimately about internal transformation, not just external accumulation.
Okay, so wrapping this all up then,
Yeah.
what does this all mean? Our pretty extensive deep dive into this concept of the lifelong learner, specifically from the Proverbs 31 perspective, it's really revealed that this pursuit is far more comprehensive, far more integrated than just being intellectually curious. It's really an integrated strategy for living a successful, truly meaningful life.
Mm-hmm.
We established that it's framed as a spiritual calling, one that demands attention across those four critical dimensions, the emotional, the spiritual, the intellectual, and the relational,
Yep.
all interconnected. And this holistic growth, which we saw is rooted in the humility needed for both active seeking, like in Proverbs 18.15, and disciplined study,
Mm-hmm.
like in 2 Timothy 2.15, it provides really concrete benefits, benefits like deepened faith, strengthened relationships, and maybe most crucially, empowerment for dynamic leadership and relevant service across generations.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps most importantly, for those of us navigating the pressures of modern life, we found this profound encouragement in the idea that growth is seasonal. It adapts to you, to where you are. So whether you're tuning into this while you're multitasking, or maybe journaling quietly, or enjoying a quiet morning coffee, the commitment to knowledge seeking, it actually fits into the everyday routine, and every step, regardless of its pace or its specific subject matter, it counts towards that comprehensive, holistic growth.
Right. And as you really internalize this concept, thinking of lifelong learning as a spiritual calling, as this mission to develop all four quadrants of your being, I do want to leave you with a final, maybe provocative thought, something that builds directly on that idea of applying this knowledge to serve across generations.
Yep.
See, it's pretty easy to focus on the immediate personal gain of learning something new, right? The meeting you'll now be able to crush or the problem you can finally solve. That's satisfying. But your pursuit of knowledge today, viewed through this lens, it's actually a fundamental investment in the future well-being of other people. So consider this long-term legacy perspective. How will the emotional depth you gain from just surviving this challenging season you might be in? How will the intellectual clarity you gain from studying that complex subject? How will the relational empathy you gain from navigating that difficult conversation? How will all that specifically equip the person you might mentor 10 years down the road? Your current diligence, your current learning, it isn't just for your own benefit right now. It is literally the toolkit you are building for the next generation of learners and leaders. So go forth and learn intentionally.
Thank you for joining us today on From Manuscript to Ministry. If today's featured book encouraged, challenged, or inspired you, we invite you to take the next step, purchase a copy, and support the author behind the message. When you invest in their work, you're not just buying a book, you're sowing into good ground and helping advance the kingdom of God through faith-filled storytelling. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who needs it. Your support helps these powerful voices reach even further. Until next time, keep reading, keep writing, keep praying, and keep walking boldly in your calling. God is still turning manuscripts into ministries.